everybody. So I'm late night, early morning. It's about 3 where I'm at now. And I was just led to, yeah, roosters roosting. I was just led to dive into this new read. I've been reading the book Centered, Trading Your Life, Trading Your Plans for a Life That Matters by former NFL player turned farmer Jason Brown. And I'm really into self sustainability and gardening to help provide our self sustainability. So I want to get to as many books as I can, especially since I'm traveling and stuff, and I want to condense my load. And this is one of the books that I've been wanting to dive into. This book is called Farming While Black: Soulfire Farms Practical Guide to Liberation on the Land. And it's written by a sister by the name of Leah Penniman. So I'm just going to get into it. You can find this read. I'll be uploading them onto my YouTube. So here we go. On the back, it says, some of our most cherished sustainable farming practices have roots in African wisdom, yet discrimination and violence against African American farmers has led to their decline from 14% of all growers in 1920 to less than 2% today, with a corresponding loss of over 14 million acres of land. Further, Black communities suffer disproportionately from illnesses related to lack of access to fresh food and healthy natural ecosystems. Leah Pennyman, co-founder of Soulfire Farm, is committed to ending racism and injustice in our food system by increasing farmland stewardship by people of color, promoting equity in food access, and training the next generation of activist farmers. Farming While Black offers the first comprehensive manual for African heritage people ready to reclaim their rightful place of dignified agency in the food system. This one of a kind guide provides readers with a concise how to for all aspects of small scale farming, including finding land and resources, which is important, writing a farm business plan, preserving the harvest and saving seed, and much more. Owning our own land, growing our own food, educating our own youth, participating in our own healthcare and justice systems. Penniman writes, this is the source of real power and dignity. So, again, one of the reasons I was inspired to read this is because I've been reading Centered, Trading Your Plans for a Life That Matters. Why y'all ain't tell me I got lint in my hair still, in my fro? That's why I gotta lock it back up. She be doing too much. Anywho's, because in that book he was talking about going from being an NFL player to a farmer and the importance of needing land to be able to be self-sustainable. And I think sometimes we take that for granted because we can just go to a grocery store. But if the pandemic didn't teach you anything about not being able to depend on a local government or a grocery store for your needs, then it should have. You'll see that my shirt say hoeing ain't easy. And we ain't talking about the hoeing y'all used to doing. We talking about digging, tilling, getting them garden supplies, getting in that soil. It may not be easy, and we may have had to do it unwillingly during times of enslavement, but we cannot forget our agricultural roots, okay? One thing we as a people, melanated people, know how to do is grow and sustain our food, okay? We used to braid seeds into our hair to make sure that we were able to keep ourselves nourished. So I'm gonna get into this introduction, but first, I'm the type of person I like to read the whole book. I like to read the table of contents and all of that. Speaking of braiding seeds, look at this. I'm on my YouTube and Facebook. Look at this picture of them cornrowing the seed into the girl hair. That's really how deep this gets, y'all. That's really how deep this gets. It says this book is dedicated to our ancestral grandmothers who braided seeds in their hair before being forced to board transatlantic slave trips, believing against the odds in a future of sovereignty on land. All right. So the table of contents, just to give you a overview of the things that this book goes into. So the introduction, Black Land Matters. Chapter 1, Finding Land and Resources. Chapter 2, Planning Your Farm Business. Chapter 3, Honoring the Spirits of the Land. Chapter 4, Restoring Degraded Land. Chapter 5, Feeding the Soil. Chapter 6, Crop Planning. Chapter 7, Tools and Technology. Chapter 8, Seed Keeping. Chapter 9, Raising Animals. Chapter 10, Plant Medicine. Chapter 11, Urban Farming. Chapter 12, Cooking and Preserving. Chapter 13, Youth on Land. Chapter 14, Healing from Trauma. Chapter 15, Movement Building. Chapter 16, White People Uprooting Racism. So it's very interesting. I'm reading this during this particular time on my journey. Been wanting to get into this book, but I'm currently overseas out of America, doing a gardening work exchange with a black expat couple. And I'm just learning so much out here, and I'm able to get so much healing work done and just breathe outside. Look like my cloth right here. Like it's just so naturally tropical and beautiful, and the element of Mother Nature and being surrounded by that. Um, and part of this journey too is to be able to get this practice of gardening and farming on land so that eventually down the line, when I have a homestead or a farm, I can kind of have some of these skills and knowledge about how to work this land. One moment, let me grab my water. And the cool thing about where I'm staying is their water is hooked up to a natural spring. So I just refill this bottle every day. I have bought this when I got off the plane, but I just been refilling it with their natural spring water out the sink. The tap water you can drink. All right, so let's get into this forward. Wait a minute. Do I want to read the forward or the intro? I think I just want to read the intro. Yeah. Forward is by somebody else. Okay. Introduction. Black Land Matters. And it starts off with a quote by Malcolm X that reads, "Revolution is based on land. Land is the basis of all independence. Land is the basis of freedom, justice, and equality." As a young person and one of three mixed race black children raised in the rural North, mostly by our white father, I found it very difficult to understand who I was. This seems to be the biracial plight. Some of the children in our conservative, almost all white public school taunted, bullied, and assaulted us, and I was confused and terrified by their malice. But while school was often terrifying, I found solace in the forest. When human beings were too much to bear, the earth consistently held firm under my feet, and the solid, sticky trunk of the majestic white pine offered me something stable to grasp. I imagined that I was alone in identifying with Earth as Sacred Mother, having no idea that my African ancestors were transmitting their cosmology to me, whispering across time, "Hold on, daughter, we won't let you fall." I never imagined that I would become a farmer. In my teenage years, as my race consciousness evolved, I got the message loud and clear that black activists were concerned with gun violence, housing discrimination, and education reform, while white folks were concerned with organic farming and environmental conservation. I felt that I had to choose between my people and the earth, that my dual loyalties were pulling me apart and negating my inherent right to belong. Fortunately, my ancestors had other plans. I passed by a flyer advertising a summer job at the Food Project in Boston, Massachusetts, that promised applicants the opportunity to grow food and serve the urban community. I was blessed to be accepted into the program, and from the first day, when the scent of freshly harvested cilantro nested into my fingers, to my finger creases, and dirty sweat stung my eyes, I was hooked on farming. Something profound and magical happened to me as I learned to plant, tend, and harvest, and later to prepare and serve produce in Boston's toughest neighborhoods. I found an anchor in the elegant simplicity of working the earth and sharing her bounty. What I was doing was good, right, and unconfused. Shoulder to shoulder with my peers of all hues, feet planted firmly in the earth, stewarding life giving crops for black community, I was home. As it turned out, the food project was relatively unique in terms of integrating a land ethic and a social justice mission. From there, I went on to learn and work at several other rural farms across the Northeast. While I cherished the agriculture expertise imparted by my mentors, I was also keenly aware that I was immersed in a white dominated landscape. At organic agriculture conferences, all of the speakers were white. All of the technical books sold were authored by white people, and conversations about equity were considered irrelevant. Mm. I thought that organic farming was invented by white people and worried that my ancestors who fought and died to break away from the land would roll over in their graves to see me stooping. I struggled with the feeling that a life on land would be a portrayal of my people. I could not have been more wrong. At the annual gathering of the Northeast Organic Farming Association, I decided to ask the handful of people of color at the event to gather for a conversation known as a caucus. In that conversation, I learned that my struggles as a black farmer in a white dominated agriculture community were not unique, and we decided to create another conference to bring together black and brown farmers and urban gardeners. In 2010, the National Black Farmers and Urban Gardeners Conference, BUGS, which continues to meet annually, was convened by Karen Washington. Over 500 aspiring and veteran black farmers gathered for knowledge exchange and for affirmation of our belonging to the sustainable food movement. Through BUGS, which is Black Farmers and Urban Gardeners Conference, through BUGS and my growing network of black farmers, I began to see how miseducated I had been regarding sustainable agriculture. I learned that organic farming was an African American indigenous system developed over millennia and first revived in the United States by a black farmer, Dr. George Washington Carver of Tuskegee University in the early 1900s. Carver conducted extensive research and codified the use of crop rotation in combination with the planting of nitrogen fixing legumes and detailed how to regenerate soil biology. His system was known as regenerative agriculture and helped move many southern farmers away from monoculture and toward diversified horticulture operations. Dr. Booker T. Watley, another Tuskegee professor, was one of the investors of Community Supported Agriculture, or CSA. It has a little footnote at the bottom. Community Supported Agriculture, CSA, is a food production and distribution system that directly connects farmers and consumers. In short, people buy shares of the farm's harvest in advance and then receive a portion of the crops as they're harvested. That's really cool. I like that. So instead of, if you buy a bunch of cucumbers and tomatoes and lettuce and cabbage and collard greens from the store throughout the year, you could be connected with a local farmer that's doing that. And when their harvest comes to, you get a portion of that. I think that's really dope. So, Dr. Booker T. Watley, another Tuskegee professor, was one of the investors of Community Supported Agriculture, which he called CSA, which he called a clientele membership club. He advocated for diversified pick your own operations that produced an assortment of crops year round. He developed a system that allowed consumer members to access produce at 40% of the supermarket pricing. Further, I learned that community land trusts were first started in 1969 by black farmers, with the New Committees movement leading the way in Georgia. Land trusts were nonprofit organizations that achieved conservation and affordable housing goals through cooperative ownership of land and restrictive covenants of land use and sale. In addition to catalyzing the community land trust, black farmers also demonstrated how cooperatives could provide for the material needs of their members, such as housing, farm equipment, student scholarships and loans, excuse me, as well as organized for structural change. The 1886 Colored Farmers National Alliance and Cooperative Union and Fannie Lou Hamer's 1972 Freedom Farm were salient examples of black leadership in the cooperative farming movement. And I'm going to be reading a book on Fannie Lou Hamer's life, an amazing activist that was definitely about self-sustainability through food and farming. Amazing woman. Learning about Carver, Hamer, Watley, and new communities, I realized that during all those years of seeing images of only white people as the stewards of the land, only white people as organic farmers, only white people in conversations about sustainability, the only consistent story I'd seen or been told about black people in the land was about slavery and sharecropping, about coercion and brutality and misery and sorrow. Yeah, that's the picture they want to paint, because they knew if we tapped into our natural innate abilities and gifts and was able to feed ourselves and not depend on them, where would that leave them? Come on now. And yet, here was an entire history blooming into our present in which black people's expertise and love of the land and one another was evident. When we as black people are bombarded with messages that our only place of belonging on land is as slaves, performing dangerous and backbreaking menial labor, to learn of our true and noble history as farmers and ecological stewards is deeply healing. I'm going to have to quote that. That's good. Where's my pen when I need it? That's a good quote right there. Mm-hmm. This be my problem when I be reading. I be always taking notes and underlining stuff and stopping to quote it on Facebook. Okay, she said, when we as black people are bombarded with messages that our only place of belonging on land is as slaves performing dangerous and back-breaking menial labor, to learn of our true and noble histories as farmers and ecological stewards is deeply healing. Fortified by a more accurate picture of my people's belonging on the land, I knew I was ready to create a mission driven farm centering on the needs of the black community. At the time, I was living with my Jewish husband, Jonah, and our two young children, Nashima and Emmett, in the south end of Albany, New York, a neighborhood classified as a food desert by the federal government. On a personal level, this meant that despite our deep commitment to feeding our young children fresh food, and despite our extensive farming skills, structural barriers to accessing good food stood in our way. The corner store specialized in Doritos and Coke. We would have needed a car or taxi to get to the nearest grocery store, which served up artificially inflated prices and wrinkled vegetables. There were no available lots where we could garden. Desperate, we signed up for a CSA share, which again means Community Supported Agriculture, which is a food production and distribution system that directly connects farmers and consumers. People buy shares of a farm's harvest in advance and receive a portion of the crops that they've harvested. CSA. Um, so desperate, we signed up for a CSA share and walked 2.2 miles to the pickup point where the new with the newborn in the backpack and the toddler in the stroller. We paid more than we could afford for these vegetables and literally had to pile them on top of the resting toddler for the long walk back to our apartment. When our South End neighbors learned that Jonah and I had both had many years of experience working on farms, from Many Hands Organic Farms in Bear, Massachusetts, to Live Power Farm in Covello, California, they began to ask whether we planned to start a farm to feed this community. At first, we hesitated. I was a full-time public school science teacher. Jonah had his natural building business, and we were parenting two young children. But we were firmly rooted in our love for our people and for the land, and this passion for justice won out. We cobbled together our modest savings, loans from friends and family, and 40% of my teaching salary every year in order to capitalize the project. The land that chose us was relatively affordable, with just over $2,000 an acre, but the necessary investments in electricity, septic, water, and dwelling spaces tripled that cost. With the tireless support of hundreds of volunteers, and after 4 years of building infrastructure and soil, we opened Soul Fire Farm, a project committed to ending racism and injustice in the food system, providing life giving food to people living in food deserts, and transferring skills and knowledge to the next generation of farmer activists. That's beautiful. Our first order of business was feeding our community back in the south end of Albany. While the government labels this neighborhood a food desert, I prefer the term food apartheid because it makes clear that we have a human created system of segregation that regulates certain groups to food opulence and prevents others from accessing life giving nourishment. Another great, undeniable. hmm While the government labels this neighborhood a food desert, I prefer the term food apartheid because it makes clear that we have a human created system of segregation that regulates certain groups to food opulence and prevents others from accessing life giving nourishment. About 24 million Americans live under food apartheid, in which it's difficult to impossible to access affordable, healthy food. This trend is not race neutral. White neighborhoods have an average of 4 times as many supermarkets as predominantly black communities. The Yes, when I would go to, because in the areas that I lived in, the closest stores were Walmart or Food Line, and they still were a trek if I was walking and or a good drive. So when I would go to certain communities which were predominantly white, I would notice there would be so many more options. There's a Whole Foods, there's a Publix, there's a Fresh Market, there's just so many different other health food options and stores in their area that is few and far between in our areas. And I'm like, Find that to be very odd, but I'm not surprised. I know what the game is. I know what they're doing. This lack of access to nutritious food has dire consequences for our communities. Incidences of diabetes, obesity, and heart disease are on the rise in all populations, but the greatest increases have occurred amongst people of color, especially African Americans and Native Americans. These diet related illnesses are fueled by high diets and unhealthy fats, cholesterol, and refined sugars, and low in fresh fruits, vegetables, and legumes. In our communities, children are being raised on processed foods, and now over one third of children are overweight or obese, and fourfold increase over the past 30 years. This puts the next generation at risk for lifelong chronic health conditions, including several types of cancer. At Soul Fire Farm, we had to invest in the soil in order for her to yield the food our community needed. Working hard to build up the marginal rocky slope soils using no-till methods, we managed to create about a foot of topsoil into this rich young earth. We were finally ready to plant over 80 varieties of mostly heirloom vegetables and small fruit, centering crops with cultural significance to our peoples. Once per week, we harvested the bounty and boxed it up into even shares that contain 8 to 12 vegetables each, plus a dozen eggs, sprouts, and or poultry for the members of South End community. The farm share was a subscription program based on the African American Kwanzaa principle of Ujamaa, meaning cooperative economics. As Dr. Mulana Karinga once explained, in a world where greed, resource seizure, and plunder have been globalized with maximum technological and military power, we must uphold the principle and practice of Ujamaa, cooperative economics, or shared work and wealth. Ashe. Yes. Okay. This principle reaffirms the right to control and benefit from the resources of one's own lands and to an equitable and just share of the goods of the world. Desiring to move beyond the casual and exploitive relationship between producer and consumer that capitalism celebrates, we develop long term relationships of mutual commitment with our members. In early spring, members signed up for the program and committed to spend whatever they could afford on our farm's bounty. We used a sliding scale model where people contributed depending on their level of income and wealth. In turn, we committed to providing members with a weekly delivery of bountiful, high quality food throughout the harvest season, which lasts 20 to 22 weeks in our climate. We delivered the boxes directly to the doorsteps of people living under food apartheid and accepted government benefits as payment, such as the Federal Supplemental Nutrition Assistance, SNAP, or EBT, or food stamps. This reduced the two most pressing barriers to food access, transportation, and cost. Using the farm share model, we can now feed 80 to 100 families, many of whom we would not otherwise have access to life giving foods. One member told us that their family would be eating only boiled pasta if it were not for this veggie box. While it was and continues to be essential for us as farmers to maintain a commitment to food access, that work alone is inadequate to address the systematic issues that led to food apartheid in the first place. Racism is built into the DNA of the U.S. food system, beginning with the genocidal land theft from indigenous people, continuing with the kidnapping of our ancestors from the shores of West Africa for forced agricultural labor, morphing into convict leasing, expanding to the migrant guest worker program, and maturing into its current state where farm management is among the whitest professions. Farm labor is predominantly brown and exploited, and people of color disproportionately live in food apartheid neighborhoods and suffer from diet related illness. This system is built on stolen land and stolen labor and needs a redesign. This girl. Mm, 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 mm. This system is built on stolen land and stolen labor and needs a redesign. We were aware that we could not solve the entire problem on our own, but neither could we cast our silent vote for the status quo through complicit non action. Aware that we cannot solve the entire problem on our own, but neither could we cast our silent vote for the status quo through complicit non action. I like that. We were aware that we could not solve the entire problem on our own, but neither could we cast our silent vote for the status quo through complicit non-action. So even though you may not like something and can't chase it overnight or do it by yourself, doesn't mean don't do anything at all. One voice is better than none. Two or three together can make a lot happen, can change the world. We needed mentors from our elders. We invited veteran civil rights activist Baba Curtis Hayes Muhammad to our table to discuss the role of farmers in the movement for in the movement for racial justice. Recognize that land and food have been used as a weapon to keep black people oppressed, he said. I'm gonna be highlighting this whole book. I need a highlighter. He said, recognize that land and food have been used as a weapon to keep black people oppressed. He said, recognize also that land and food are essential to liberation for black people. Muhammad explained the central role that black farmers played during the civil rights movement, coordinating campaigns for desegregation and voting rights, as well as providing food, housing, bail money, and safe haven for other organizers. With his resolute and careworn eyes, immense white afro, and hands creased with the wisdom of years, this was a man who inspired us to listen attentively so that we might stand on the shoulders of activists who had gone before. Without black farmers, there would have been no freedom summer. In fact, no civil rights movement, he said. He asked us, how are you contributing to today's movement for racial justice? Even as we continue to provide nourishing food to our people living under food apartheid in 6 Capital District neighborhoods, we knew we needed to do more. So we started to organize. We expanded our work to include youth empowerment and organizing, specifically working with adjudicated, institutionalized, and state targeted youth. Arguably, the seminal civil rights issue of our time is the systematic racism permeating the criminal justice system. The Black Lives Matter movement has brought to national attention the fact that people of color are disproportionately targeted by police stops, arrests, and police violence. And once they're in the system, they tend to receive subpar legal representation and longer sentences and are less likely to receive parole. The 2014 police killings of Eric Garner and Michael Brown were not isolated incidents, but part of a larger story of state violence toward people of color. Black youth are well aware that the system does not value their lives. Look, you're going to die from the gun or you're going to die from bad food, one young man said while visiting the Soul Fire Farm. So there's really no point. That fatalism, a form of internalized racism, is common among black youth. It's a clear sign that this country needs a united social movement to rip out racism at its roots and dismantle the caste system that makes these young people unable to see that their beautiful black lives do matter. We started the Youth Food Justice Program in our 3rd year, aiming to liberate our young people from the criminal punishment system through an agreement with the Albany County courts. Young people could choose to complete our on farm training program in lieu of punitive sentencing. It was imperative that we interrupt the school to prison pipeline that demonizes and criminalizes our youth. Oh, I love this. This is beautiful. We felt that young people instead needed mentorship from adults with similar backgrounds, connection to land, and full respect for their humanity. I mean, yeah, because what else? Like, what else are these kids getting involved in besides sports? We got to give them something constructive to do. Teach them something that's bigger than themselves, that help connect them back to the land, to themselves, to other people. And being on land and growing food is one of the greatest ways to do that. I fully support what she's doing. I love it. In the 50-hour training program, young people learn basic farming, cooking, and business skills. More important, they learned that they were necessary, that they were valuable, and they belonged. We took our shoes off and placed our bare feet firmly on the warm earth as we walked past the garlic field, the swallows swooping over the buckwheat flowers, the grandmothers in the ancestor realm whispered their love for us. The most hardened and defended child, who earlier asked, "What's the point?" began to weep. His grandmothers reached for him through the earth under his feet and reminded him that there was a point. He and his peers found meaning in tending the crops that would feed their communities back home and teaching adults the skills they had garnered. They sat in a circle and analyzed the brokenness of the criminal punishment system, compiling necessary policy changes that would be championed by the New York State Prisoner Justice Network. They made bows and arrows in the forest, threw stones in the pond, and allowed themselves some laughter. My original charge was loitering, and then once I was in the system, everything got harder and started getting out of control, shared one young man on the first day of the program. As others spoke, we learned that his story was not unique. In fact, most of the young men's first arrest for loitering. I shared with the group that loitering laws were part of the vacancy statutes included in the black codes. These were laws written to control and re enslave the black population after Reconstruction, a set of policies that followed the Civil War. Some things have not changed. This is a picture of the youth digging their feet into the muddy soil. We agreed with the position of Malcolm X and his message to the grassroots, a speech he delivered in 1963. I'm going to have to look that up. Malcolm X speech, message to the grassroots. A speech he delivered in 1963. Revolution is based on land, he said. Land is the basis of all independence. Land is the basis of freedom, justice, and equality. We saw the Youth Food Justice Program as an opportunity for these young men to heal relationships with their communities, the land, and themselves, as well as to recognize their potential to be agents of change in society. However, it was not enough for young people to simply feel connected to land. We knew the land and belonged to the land, but the land did not belong to us. Ralph Page of the Federation of Southern Cooperatives put it simply: land is the only real wealth in this country, and if we don't have any, then we're out the picture. Brutal racism, maiming, lynching, burning, desperation, deportation, economic violence, legal violence ensured that our roots would not spread deeply and securely. In 1910, at the height of black land ownership, 16 million acres of farmland, 14% of the total, was owned and cultivated by black families. Now less than 1% of farms are black owned. Our black ancestors were forced, tricked, and scared off land until 6.5 million of them migrated to the urban north in the largest migration in U.S. history. This was no accident. Just as the U.S. government sanctioned the slaughter of buffalo to drive Native Americans off their land, so did the United States Department of Agriculture and the Federal Housing Administration deny access to farm credit and other resources to any black person who joined the NAACP, registered to vote, or signed any petition pertaining to civil rights. When Carver's methods helped black farmers be successful enough to pay off their debts, their white landlords responded by beating them almost to death, burning down their houses, and driving them off the land. Hold on, I gotta find another pen. This one is leaking. Leaking on my page, child. I need a highlighter. This is the part that infuriates me, right? Because it's like a lot of our relation to land, as stated, we just think of slavery, being enslaved, and forced labor. And so a lot of us stood back for that reason. But those of us that after slavery were sharecroppers or depended on having land to feed our family or to be a part of the capitalism and trading and selling food and things like that, the fact the system has used these black codes just like they did when we were fighting for civil rights and post-slavery, having certain laws and codes that you could be hung for or killed for just trying to survive, trying to maintain our lifestyle. And growing food was one of those things that was innate within us and is our right. And yet and still they continue to try to take that away from us. I'm gonna read this last paragraph again because it's just mind-blowing. Brutal racism, maiming, lynching, burning, deportation, economic violence, legal violence ensure that our roots would not spread deeply and securely. In 1910, at the height of black land ownership, 16 million acres of farmland, 14% of the total, was owned and cultivated by black families. Now, less than 1% of farms are black owned. Our black ancestors were forced, tricked, and scared off land until 6.5 million of them migrated to the urban north in the largest migration in history. This was no accident. Just as the U.S. government sanctioned the slaughter of buffalo to drive Native Americans off their land, so did the United States Department of Agriculture and the Federal Housing Administration deny access to farm credit and other resources to any black person who joined the NAACP, registered to vote, or signed any petition pertaining to civil rights. When Carver's methods helped black farmers be successful enough to pay off their debts, their white landlords responded by beating them almost to death, burning down their houses, and driving them off the land. Like just heinous, heinous crimes. against being black and growing food. Jeez. According to the think tank Race Forward, even today, blacks, Latinx, and indigenous people working in the food system are more likely than whites to earn lower wages, receive fewer benefits, and live without access to healthy food. Owning our own land, growing our own food, educating our own youth, participating in our own healthcare and justice systems, this is the source of real power and dignity. Yes, yes, yes. Could say that 3 times fast. Owning our own land, growing our own food, educating our own youth, participating in our own healthcare and justice systems. This is the source of real power and dignity. In our 4th year, we started the Black Latinx Farmers Immersion at Soulfire Farm as a humble attempt to rewrite part of this history, to reclaim our ancestral right to both belong to the land and have the land belong to us. We heard time and again from aspiring black and brown farmers that agriculture training programs in their communities were, at best, culturally irrelevant, and often outright racist. One young black farmer was subjugated to the white farm owner, asking him over bean picking, why is it that black men abandon their families? Another sister shared that her application had been denied for several apprenticeships and incubator farms, and she could not afford to leave her family to attend a land grant university. We knew that we had to act. The Black Latinx Farmer Immersion was designed as a rigorous introduction to small scale sustainable farming that balanced the nerdy explication of concepts like soil Cation exchange capacity with the cultural and historical teachings necessary for our people to heal our relationships to land. On a typical day, we woke at dawn and circled up on the dew covered grass for morning movement. From there, we broke into teams to learn hands on farming tasks by doing bed prep, seeding, transplanting, pest control, and then share that knowledge with other participants through an each one teach one popular education model. We took turns cooking the recipes of our ancestors, substituting locally grown vegetables for their tropical equivalents. We learned the songs and prayers used in the process of slaughtering animals. We learned to take life. Then we engaged in herbal healing baths in the African tradition to cleanse that strong energy and lay down our metaphorical knives. We used drums and song to encourage the seeds to grow, and we filled the moonlit night sky with the sounds of our dancing to Kendrick Lamar and Nicki Minaj. What? We bathe ourselves in resiliency. On the last day of the week long program, we sealed our intentions with the words of Ashada Shakur. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love each other and support each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains. Okay, Ashada. I like that. It is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love each other and support each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains. We chanted it over and over, growing louder each time until the powerful echoes of our shouts mingled with quiet tears, tears for the struggles of oppressed peoples, and tears for the hope of liberation. Alumni of the Black Latinx Farmers Immersion have become a force to be reckoned with in the food justice world. Together, we have catalyzed a national reparations initiative to return stolen land and resources to our people. We are working on a Northeast Regional Land Trust that will upend private ownership of Mama Earth and increase farmland stewardship by people of color. Our alumni collective of speakers and trainers are waking the public up to the pervasive injustice in the food system and providing concrete, actionable next steps to restore justice. We have even expanded our solidarity work beyond the imaginary political boundaries of nation state to include sibling farms in Haiti, Puerto Rico, Mexico, Ghana, and Brazil with whom we work, organize, and learn through mutual exchange. Black Latinx Farmer Immersion was a little peek into what is possible in a mended world. Our people have been traumatized and disoriented. While the land was the scene of the crime, she was never the criminal. Our people mistakenly strove to divorce ourselves from her in an effort to get free, but without the land, we cannot be free. This book, Farming While Black, is a reverently compiled manual for African heritage people ready to reclaim our rightful place of dignified agency in the food system. To farm while black is an act of defiance against supremacy and means to honor the agricultural ingenuity of our ancestors. Let me underline that. To farm while black is an act of defiance against white supremacy and a means to honor the agricultural ingenuity of our ancestors. As Toni Morrison is reported to have said, If there's a book you really want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it. Farming While Black is the book I needed someone to write for me when I was a teen who incorrectly believed that choosing a life on land would be a betrayal of my ancestors and of my black community. We have organized and expanded upon the curriculum of the Black Latinx Farmers Immersion to provide readers with a concise how to for all aspects of small scale farming, from business planning to preserving the harvest. Throughout the chapters, we include uplift sidebars to elevate the wisdom of the African diasporic farmers and activists whose work informs the techniques described. For example, in the chapter about accessing funding for your farming venture, you will learn about federal loan programs and also about setting up a susu, a traditional Caribbean form of community lending. In the chapter about soil repair, you will read about techniques used by the Haitian community to restore degraded hillsides that can be adapted for use in your climate. At the end of the book, there is a resources section with contact information for the organizers referenced in the chapters. Each chapter also reveals an honest and transparent portion of the story of Soulfire Farm. You will cry with us as we hand dig our foundation through hard clay, hands bloody with broken calluses and hearts near defeat. You will celebrate with us as we triple the depth of our topsoil using techniques taught to us by Haitian farmers and defy the naysayers who told us that vegetables cannot be grown in these mountains. This book will also be honest about the limitations of its perspective. As a multiracial, light skinned, raised, wait a minute. As a multiracial, light skinned, raised rural, northeastern, college educated, cisgender, able bodied, Jewish Vodun practicing biological mother who grew up working class, this author will invariably introduce bias into the text and invisibilize crucial experiences of members of our black farming community. This book is mainly told from my life experience as an activist farmer, recognizing that each member of the 10-person team that is Soulfire Farm has their own equally rich story of arriving at this work. From the harm that we may come from the limitations in my perspective, I apologize and pledge to do what I can to uplift the voices of the black farmers who complete and augment the narrative. The technical information presented is designed for farmers and gardeners with 0 to 5 years experience. For those with more experience, we hope that this book provides a fresh lens on practices you may have taken for granted as a historical or strictly European. Our black ancestors and contemporaries have always been leaders in the sustainable agriculture and food justice movements and continue to lead. It is time for us all to listen. As Toni Morrison wrote in her 1977 novel Song of Solomon, see, see what you can do. Never mind you can't tell one letter from another. Never mind you were born a slave. Never mind you lose your name. Never mind your daddy dead. Never mind nothing. Here, this here is what a man can do if he puts his mind to it and his back into it. Stop sniveling, the land said. Stop picking around the edges of the world. Take advantage, and if you can't take advantage, take disadvantage. We live here on this planet, in this nation, in this country, right here, nowhere else. We got a home in this rock, don't you see? Nobody starving in my home. Nobody crying in my home. And if I got a home, you got one too. Grab it. Grab this land. Take it. Hold it, my brothers. Make it, my brothers. Shake it. Squeeze it. Turn it. Twist it. Beat it. Kick it. Kiss it. Whip it. Stomp it. Dig it. Plow it. Seed it. Reap it. Rent it. Buy it. Sell it. Own it. Build it. Multiply it. And pass it on. Can you hear me? Pass it on. This book is an honoring of that directive to pass it on. I give thanks for that beautiful introduction by the author Leah Pettyman. So we'll be diving into this. I'll be finishing up the last book that I'm reading on Storytime Memorial, my Centered Trading Your Plans for a Life That Matters, written by former NFL player turned farmer Jason Brown. I'm looking forward to getting through this book, and I'm also looking forward to reading a book about the life of Fannie Lou Hamer, civil rights activist that fought for food security and land ownership. So thank y'all for tuning in. I hope you got something out of this. Please share this. Please consider gardening, saving seeds, knowing your local farmers, buying local fresh produce as much as possible. Staying ready so you ain't got to get ready, because if another pandemic ever hit, you don't want to be the one trying to survive because the grocery store don't have what you need. Okay, take this seriously. Appreciate y'all for tuning in and listening. Peace.